Hi, it's June 2024 and welcome back to Matthew Explores. It's been 2 years nearly since my last video and we're back and we're about to visit the seaside and Eastbourne Pier. So Eastbourne Pier, it was built in the late 1800s, designed by Eugenius Birch. It was built at a time when the Victorians had a boom in pier building across the country. Many British seaside towns built piers in the late 1800s, many of them designed by Eugenius Birch as well, including the West Pier at Brighton. The Brighton West Pier was said to be the finest example of Victorian ironwork on a seaside pier, closely followed by the pier at Eastbourne. Unfortunately, however, the West Pier at Brighton no longer exists due to damage by fire many years ago. However, Eastbourne Pier does exist still, and it has battled its way through and survived fires, storm damage and world wars. In this time it's gone through multiple transformations and refurbishments. 1865 saw the creation of the Eastbourne Pier Company and work began on the pier in 1866. The work took 4 years and the pier was officially opened by Lord Edward Cavendish in 1870, although the pier wasn't actually finished until 1872. In 1870, when the pier was officially open to the public, it was a day of celebration throughout the town, and over 1,000 people attended the opening ceremony, with praise by the local constabulary and fire brigade and the Lifeboat Association. The cost of the pier was approximately £13,000, which equates to about 1.2 million in 2024. At its completion in 1872, the length was approximately 1,000 feet and the width was about 27 feet. The pier is constructed on a series of piles screwed into the ground, and these sit on cups in the bedrock. The reason the screw piles sit in the cups is to allow for movement in high winds or stormy weather. When initially completed, the pier used to meet the seafront promenade on the lower promenade. It's now connected to the upper promenade, and this is due to a storm on New Year's Day in 1877. Although the cup and the pile system allowed for some movement, it didn't allow for enough, and New Year's Day 1877 would see the collapse of the first third approximately of the pier. The pier was then rebuilt and it was connected to the upper promenade, lifting the height of the pier. Taking a stroll along the pier today, it's easy to see where the higher part of the pier is, as there's quite a significant ramp approximately a third of the way down. When the pier initially opened, it was quite a bland open area. There was a few attractions. There was a cafe and a resident brass band, and the end of it had the landing stage, which is now used for angling. In the pier's heyday, the landing stage was home to regular visits from paddle steamers and many other types of boats. On a fairly regular basis there was boat trips of different sorts, including the 007 red and yellow speedboat. Through the 80s that would have been. There was also hovercrafts, and there was the paddle steamers trips, and you could actually get the steamer to Boulogne for a day trip in the 1950s.
Join the queue now for a magic carpet trip, a no passport journey to France. A simple formality, the receipt of a photographed identity card, and you're off on one of the cheapest and most trouble-free adventures. Goodbye, England, you wave, and you're off for the day. Off to the continent for a day of wine and wonders, and back in time for a good night cup of cocoa.
The paddle steamers haven't been back to Eastbourne Pier for a long period of time. However, this year, 2024, in September, the Waverley paddle steamer is due to make a visit to Eastbourne on the 12th of September. It's doing 2 visits, one in the afternoon, one in the evening. I'm currently booked on the evening one, so we'll be hoping for some good weather that day. Moving on. The buildings on the pier at the seaward end started off life in 1888, originally a 400-seat theatre. However, this was only for approximately 10 years, and in 1901 it was rebuilt. The rebuild consisted of a 1,000 seat cinema, the camera obscura and office suites for the pier. The camera obscura fell into disuse in the 1960s, although in the early 2000s it was restored and is still in operation today. However, the theatre suffered a major fire in 1970, and this was suspected to be arson, although no one was ever found guilty of it. And once it was rebuilt, it was turned into a nightclub and the bar that is there today. The landward end of the pier in 1925 would see the construction of the ballroom, later turned into the arcade, and later in 2014 falling victim to another fire that again was suspected arson, but no one has been charged. The 2014 fire completely devastated the ballroom and several of the buildings further along the pier. These buildings have never been rebuilt since the fire, even though the structure is Grade 2 listed, and it is a pity that the buildings have never been replaced. Instead, they've just been replaced with modern plastic structures that look like they're large sheds, nothing more. Certainly not the ironwork quality that was originally there. The windbreaks were also built in the centre of the pier, and in the middle where the ramp is, there's been several shops either side of it, including the glass workshop that I think's been there, well, since I can remember 50 years ago. I believe it's about 1968, and if I'm right, they swapped sides. They did used to be on the opposite side of the pier, but they're still there, along with your seaside tat shops. They're all still there. Although the pier was severely damaged by fires, it was also damaged throughout the war, and it also played its part in the war. It was damaged by a mine at one point, and it also had part of the decking removed, and this was in an attempt to stop the landing of any foreign invading forces using the pier as a landing bay. It's difficult to find any photos of the part that's removed during the war. However, there is a film that was released in 1943 called Millions Like Us that had a significant part of it filmed in Eastbourne, and there is a shot which I've taken a still from that shows the missing part of the pier. Also, if you're local to the area, you'll know the Cavendish Hotel. There's also a clip of the Cavendish Hotel and the bomb damage to that, and that's from the 1943 film. The entrance to the pier has gone through multiple facelifts over the time, especially in 1912 and in the 50s and in the 90s. 1991 saw a new £500,000 facelift opened by the Duke of Devonshire. While researching the video, I've come across a few headline stories that have made papers over the years, and several fires also took place along with the ones in 1970 and 2014. Fortunately, these ones weren't quite as severe. There was a fire in 1878, there was another fire in 1924, and another fire in 1935. Fortunately, none of these resulted in too much damage. And in 1921, one of Shackleton's boats that were used in his expedition to the Antarctic moored at the pier before going on to its final place at the Thames. 1923 was fairly eventful. In November, a 40-foot crane collapsed. Thankfully, the workers on the crane managed to jump clear of it, but it collapsed into the sea, and that was in 1923. On a more cheerful note, in January 1923, a fisherman angling off the end of the pier managed to catch a 4-ounce piece of gold. 1891 saw a shocking discovery when the bodies of 2 young children were found on a rock underneath the pier. 1885 would see a Henry Dobson jump from the pier and sadly died due to drowning despite efforts of local people to save him. And finally, in 2014, Stephen Penrice fell when working on the pier after the 2014 fire. Okay, we're going to leave that one here. That was Eastbourne Pier, a little bit of history. I'm not going to go into the ownership of the pier because it's a bit controversial. I've got my own opinions, so have many others. I don't really want to get into all that. So I'm going to leave that there. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and hopefully I'll bring a few more videos and wait 2 years next. Thanks all. Bye for now.